What is going on, everybody? Welcome to Artists Like Us. This is going to be the last episode of the year. So finally, we're getting to that point where we got to start off, with the whole new year here. But definitely, I'm excited to have a conversation here with this very special guest. I've known of him. I will say I don't know you personally, but I know of you for many, many years, and the chronology of knowing more about you throughout other people has been kind of fascinating in itself as well.
For sure.
This is an incredibly talented, arguably one of the most talented folks I've ever met in my life. And just I'm really excited to speak with you and really just to get to know more, about you. Miles Davis, how are you
Hi.
doing, man?
I'm doing all right. Doing great. One of those. Yeah. How are you?
I'm all right, man. I'm all right. Sunday winding down here. It's funny. I have to harken back to I feel like some of the first times that we engaged was during I want to say it was high school, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And and we had like those stupid like morning it was like I was like the producer, like the morning show or whatever it is for the school, and like first period of every class, for those who are like, what is that? First period is like the first 15 minutes are dedicated towards that, so we try to have some entertaining sketches, and we had you
Yeah.
in one as far as like you're like the younger version of my older version of whatever I was for that, whatever that skit was. But yeah, I just remember that. But then I remember just kind of hearing through people as far as this, like, your just virtuosity as a musician. And I was like, oh, wow, that's cool. And then, over the years, like I remember being in Crafton Hills College, and I took like a jazz course, and then I also took a like a music theory class or whatever, and your name came up. And Barry McNaughton, I don't know if you remember.
Yeah.
Yeah. Barry was he was a teacher in two of those classes, and and I was like, Barry's like insane, like it's one of the most insane players I've ever experienced to see as a teacher. But
Wonderful.
you came up, and he had so many nice things to say
Oh,
about how amazing of a musician you were. He was just like, because he remembered that you played something. I don't know what it was, I don't know where it was, but he was like, everything was perfect. Like just like the just how the notes were played and all this stuff. And he was just like,
oh
he
wow.
was. Yeah, it was like incredible, and I'm just like, how long does it take to be good? It's like a jazz guitar player, and he's like, I don't fucking know. So like at that point I was just like, I might have chosen the wrong instrument, but yeah, man, I just wanted to give you those those kudos there. Yeah, it's just funny getting to know, I'm sure you've probably heard similar things, but I just thought it was funny where it's just like I didn't see you for a long time after that, but I just remember hearing about you and like, yeah, he's still kicking ass. He's still doing his thing.
Oh, thank you. Um, I mean, gosh, there's so much I could say about that. I feel like I'm 31 years old now, and I feel like very much right now I'm sort of in this winter of discovering uh, how being like a gifted kid, like really early on, it has the potential. I'm not going to say it does, but it has the potential to sort of stunt you a little bit later. I can only speak autobiographically, but sort of the thing I'm waking up to right now is that because some of these instruments, like I would say saxophone and clarinet in particular, were, and I don't even really know why, but they were just so sort of like smooth and natural for me to pick up that now I'm learning, like as a 31-year-old who, there are things that I need to do in life and skills I need to learn that like require that day to day consistent, showing up every day kind of practice. And it's crazy to, kind of turn around and realize that at 31 years old, it's like, ooh, I don't know that I ever like truly developed that, and I say that, I think because I value, kind of like what you were saying earlier, the ability to just be like authentic like that on this show. I think growing up, especially like the Redlands Circle, and I do hear a lot of just like, oh, he's one of the most talented people I've ever played with, and like, I think for me, I'm beginning to realize how like the playing field is not necessarily like this. It's like, hey, it can be a blessing to learn how to work. It can be a blessing to learn how to be consistent. That said, all of that said, like, well, I didn't get much sleep last night, so pardon me if I'm a little disjunct. I had a gig.
No worries. No worries.
But yeah. So I guess no one ever stops learning, right? And but it's super flattering that people continue to have those nice things to say. And I think what's been going on in my brain is sort of this idea of like, okay, so I was this gifted kid and a gifted teenager, and I'm still, like I don't just, there can exist a dynamic where you start to feel like, oh, I should have done more, or I should be doing more, if I'm to be proportional to what people were saying about me or saying to me, like as a kid, as a teenager, it's not some chronic, like years long, like, oh God.
And definitely too, I want to kind of talk about just, the origin of you, right? As far as this kind of, way back when, being a kid growing up, like did you grow up in a very musical family? What did that look like for you when you were, when you were growing up?
My parents, so I have an older brother who was around at the time and a younger brother who was not. And my older brother and I both like were kind of low-key forced into piano lessons when we were like 6, when I was 6 and he was 7, I think. And we both did it for like a year. I took onto it, I think, a lot more. I just started enjoying playing the piano like a lot, just for fun, And am I losing sight of the question?
Oh no, yeah, no, you're answering as you speak. Yeah, I was just asking for like, did you grow up in a musical household? Like, what did that look like for you? So yeah. Please continue.
Not really. I think the short answer would be not really.
Okay.
Both of my brothers played instruments in band, and actually, my dad played trumpet in band when he was in school.
Okay.
And my mom actually, I think the reason we even had the piano in the house is because she. When she was like a young adult, like she used to do piano competitions. Like apparently that was like a really common thing. She grew up in Washington, D.C.
Okay.
And at that point, she was a first generation. First generation is the generation after the people that immigrated to the new place, right? So my mother was a first generation Haitian immigrant, and I'm kind of disconnected from this, sadly, but I think there's like a really strong like arts culture to like Haitian culture, like painting and dance and music, and so that was always something that was like very serious. My mom listened to a lot of classical music. Apparently, when she was a kid and she was with her older brother, and their parents were also just like. She says they forced them to listen to classical music instead of like the popular music that was on at the time. I think it's possible, because especially back then, right? You would think there's sort of this push to be like quote unquote sophisticated, or I don't know. I'm kind of going down a rabbit hole, but yeah.
We love rabbit holes here. So please, yeah.
Right on. Yeah. So yeah, there were a lot of kind of musical arts in my household, even if there weren't necessarily people teaching me or doing it, Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, as far as I know, you talked about like, there's there's an importance and, blessing as far as the consistency and practicing and whatnot. What did that look like for you growing up? Because obviously, mom was like, piano, like, let's start there or whatnot, and then obviously I would imagine went over to other instruments as well. Like, what was kind of did you have like a consistent practicing regimen at that time, or how was like the practicing experience for you then?
Honestly, okay, so when I first started playing piano, there really wasn't a consistent practice regimen for me. I just was someone who, like, I was a kid who just really, really enjoyed playing the piano. So I was just doing it all the time. So I was getting the practice, but it didn't feel like practice. It was like it was what they talk about, right? Well, if you, just fall in love with the thing, then it's like, and that was, and is, my truth. It's just like, I'm in love with it. And so I do it. And that doing it, ends up, causing you to level up and you get better. Yeah.
Did reading music come pretty easy for you as far as like when you were doing all of that, or were you learning reading music as you were doing that?
Yeah. We learned to read music along with the piano lessons. That was so long ago that I'm not sure if I remember if it was like a challenge or not a challenge. I think it wasn't. And I think it was because, just like the visual nature of written sheet music made sense to me. It's like, okay, we've got two staves. The lower you go, the lower the pitch, the higher the notes on the, it's by line, space, line. And okay, we've got sharps and flats. That one's okay. That's that black key. I think piano is maybe the best instrument to start with, because you will just have all of that theory just like right in front of your eyes. You're looking, there's a keyboard right here in front of me, and you can look at the keyboard and see.
It's so funny. I remember, I think you performed at the Mint in LA at once. I mean, you probably performed there many times, but I remember there was one time where I'm trying to remember why I think someone else was performing on the list or whatnot. And I just so happened, I was like, oh, snap, that's Myles. And then like, I think my friend Brian Guthrie was with him, and he was like, he plays piano too. And I was just like laughing. I was like, what does this guy not play? So like, that was just like a joy seeing that. I was like, oh wow, that's awesome.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, man, that's funny. Piano was the first one. Yeah. And the winds actually came later. And I have all sorts of instruments that I just, dabble with to like varying degrees of, it's just fun. I think when I like first started really listening to like jazz music and like orchestral music, I was really fascinated with just like all of the different sounds that all of the instruments could get. And, when I was like a little kid, like I wanted to learn them all. Like I, started with piano, and then flute was the first wind instrument I wanted to play, but I was terrible at it. So they switched me to clarinet, and that ended up working out. I would pick up flute later, and then like saxophone eventually, the double reeds, oboe and bassoon. And then brass instruments are kind of like, if I had my way, like, more than 24 hours in every day, like I believe I would do some one-man orchestra shit. Yes. Because that's time, right? It's like I could get a viola or a violin or something. I use that because that's an instrument that I'm really just not great with. You got to spend the time with it, right? They say 10,000 hours. Maybe you don't need 10,000, but like, let's say at least 3,000 or 4,000,
right,
in order to sound pretty decent, and it's just like, we're adults and we have finite lives, and you know what I mean?
I was going to say, as far as like, after high school, like where did music take you after that? What were some things that you were kind of doing after graduating?
Yeah. So, I pretty much went straight off to college at Berklee College of Music, over on the East Coast. It's funny. I wanted to take a gap year. My parents were like, no, like you're going to college. So I was like, all right. I was 16 at the time. So I wasn't even really like a fully fledged adult. Yeah. And, went to Berklee. And Berklee was a cool experience. Mainly, I think the biggest benefit of going to school like Berklee versus like a conservatory, which is what I originally wanted, was that I was just exposed to everything. I sort of developed this appreciation for genres of music that I really just didn't have much appreciation for, like a slew of rock genres. I listen to prog metal now, and I really enjoy it. And I don't know that that would have ever happened had I not gone to Berklee, and like interacted and played with musicians that, worked on that kind of music. I was sort of like a classical jazz purist back then. So I feel like the musical career really started after college. I feel almost as if I was too young in college to really get the full benefits. Too young is not the right way to put it. What it was that I still had not like grown into myself yet, if that makes sense. Like I still
makes a lot of sense. You're 16 getting exposed to all that stuff, so it's like you're becoming an adult and you're being exposed to all this like this music that you're imagining is going to be your profession. So I would imagine it's kind of a lot of internal pressure. I mean, obviously this is just kind of me thinking through all that, but
yeah, there was a lot of pressure back then, and I can say that most of it was completely unnecessary. It was a mental thing. I was just in a really weird place back then. That said, it was still a good experience. Still graduated. When I got back from Berklee, I moved back home with my parents. I was there in their basement for like 4 or 5 months, and then I started playing church organ actually in Glendale. It was like a Craigslist ad. And they just wanted someone to play like hymns for their Sunday services for like $100 a service. And I was just like, yeah, I'll do anything. So I went out there and did that. And then I want to say like a few months into that gig, there was someone else. His name was Quentin Purviance. And he's a percussionist. And he let me in on this was back in 2015. Disneyland was having auditions for the new Disneyland band. And they wanted woodwinds, saxophone, flute, clarinet. So I was like, oh, okay. So I auditioned and I got it. So I was able to stop doing that gig. I was actually teaching band at the time in North Long Beach as well.
Oh, wow.
So I stopped doing that. And pretty soon I was working in the marching band at Disneyland at full time. And that was great. That was sort of like the beginning for me, like as far as like actually having a career in the city, I just met like a slew of like really talented musicians who also had their own projects and their own circles, and that was sort of when I just started like freelancing. I would do like the full-time gig at Disneyland for 4 years until I would eventually get pretty tired of it, because you play like a lot of the same music just like over and over and over again. You're like a theme park ride on repeat.
Right.
And it's, it's hard to complain because it's like, it's still a full-time job that pays pretty well, playing an instrument, like, but after 4 years, right? You're just kind of like, okay, I think
it's like a vending machine, it's like, what, like, is there anything outside of this? Yeah.
Yeah. And that's like a really common sentiment with, musicians at the park. There's that double-headed Cerberus, right? There's like, here's the gratitude and here's the, oh my God, is this what I'm going to be doing forever?
Oh man.
Yeah.
So obviously it's like, I find it interesting, when it's like you have this great ability as far as when it comes to the musicianship, knowing the music so well, being able to teach it. And then I feel like sometimes there's another layer of, and some people struggle with this as far as like being creative yourself and not playing someone else's music, but kind of creating your own. Were you kind of doing that in the midst of doing all of this, or when was that kind of a thing for you as well?
Oh, such a good question. I was trying. There's no way to go around this, but like, okay, so at this authenticity time again, like, so the thing I was really struggling with is I believe it's called CPTSD. And this is basically like a blanket term for, traumas in your early life that may make it really difficult to basically occupy your own mind and your own body like later in life. And I find that this is another thing that I'm really chewing on, like just recently, or maybe for the past 5 years, I don't know, is right, being a skilled player versus being like an artist, right? And I think I've always wanted to be an artist, and I've written quite a few songs over the years, pieces of music that I perform occasionally out here in the city. But the truth of the matter for me, and it's an unfortunate truth, is that there is still a lot of there are still many barriers to me to being like existing as my authentic self in front of like the audience and believing, internally, like this is okay, this is good enough. And even if it's not like good enough, it is good enough. But like, even if it's not something that, pleases everyone in the room, it's still like, okay, we have to sit with that. We have to be uncomfortable with the idea that I could express myself, lyrically, and there'll be people that disagree with that. And like, I think that's something that like a lot of people learn quite early in life. And everyone has different journeys, and I've learned this is a big part of my journey is, in order to be, an artist that really shares themselves, we have to bring ourselves to a point where, we feel okay with ourselves enough, and not just okay, right? Like we have to feel like we love ourselves, right? And B, then on top of that comes the necessity of self-promotion and self-marketing, and really locking in with people that like, hey, I have this product or I have this thing to share and it's good, it's good. And I believe in it. So I'm going to put this $5,000 behind the marketing, and I'm going to, put, not cold call, but like, network and try to forge these connections that might eventually, get my music in the ears of people, or, it's like a whole journey. And, unfortunately, like I've just been dealing, with the resistance of it and part of it is that I don't know what I want to do yet. Like sounds crazy, but like there are so many things that I know that I can do. Like I write music for like wind ensemble. That's like a very cherished sort of medium for me. I like house music a lot. I do this thing where I perform at weddings with a DJ and kind of dance around with my saxophone, and that's a lot of fun. I dream about putting that into like a show that actually it's not just, some wedding saxophonist dancing around. Like I'm telling a story and also doing that too, going kind of like full pop star with it, or, you know what I mean? Part of it is that I have like too many ideas, and it's like I struggle to focus. Yeah. So those all make it, I think, a little bit difficult to be like an artist. Now, I'm not complaining at all, because for like the last decade of my life, I've been, making the 100% of my income through either writing music for screen or like composing music for people or like performing. And that's wonderful, but yeah, there certainly is this nagging sense of like, okay, well, we're getting older, and like, when are we going to start like expressing ourselves, and so that's like my current journey. Yeah,
That's really neat, man. Yeah, because I was listening to, before we started talking today, I was listening to your EP, Astrologic.
Yeah.
Man, some really dope stuff.
Thanks.
Really dope stuff. Stargazer, really, like, I was like, whoa, this has got to be in one of the motion pictures somewhere. Just a very cinematic like experience, listening to it. So I was just like, oh man, so yeah, really great stuff. So
Appreciate it.
Very neat. No, I find it, because I've had that similar struggle. I mean, I've had a lot of what you're saying. I've kind of had those feelings too this year, and it's interesting too when, as artists, it's like we can always kind of be like our worst critic, right? As far as just, when it comes outside looking in, but I know, but then like, I feel like it's almost a different animal when it's like you're not just critiquing something of like a cover, because it's like you already have like, you have the reference point. You're like, okay, it should sound like this, or, maybe we can make a slight alteration. But when it's like entirely your music, right? Your music, and you're criticizing yourself as an artist, and you want it to be portrayed a certain way where, you're presenting your right artistry. So you're not just Myles who, you orchestrate for things, and you're playing the covers or whatever it is. It's like, you're Myles, like you're the artist of you, Myles, and then like trying to like get the best part of you out there. That's kind of been like a sensibility that I've connected a lot with this year for some reason. But I don't know how you
Yeah.
feel about how you feel about that. If there's a, you know,
Well, question: getting your best part of yourself out. What do you mean by that?
so like, like as far as like, it's almost like what Hendrix would say, or they say, as far as like getting your ideas out of your mind into the guitar, but it being translated accurately, right? And then when it's accurately translated out there, there's the quality behind it, right? So you want to make, so for me, I was talking to my friend Yard about this the other day. Like I've realized as an artist, I've been really good with being okay with critiquing. Like when I do a take, I'm like, no, I need to do it again. And like no one's around saying it, but I just know for myself, like I need to do this again. And then like on like the fifth or sixth try, I'm like, that's it. Because I've like just from my experience of being around in LA too, where it's little jams or whatever, and talking to people. Some people have a really hard time critiquing themselves. It's like they don't like critique. Or I'm just like, you have to take critique some way, shape, or form. It's like put on the bulletproof vest of like, not being overly sensitive. Like you have to like take these channels as an artist. So when it comes to so what I mean as far as like as far as like projecting that, it's just like, getting the idea that you want, getting it, physically written or whatever the case may be, but then also like the quality behind it and being able to kind of break down those things as an artist. So
the criticism thing is really interesting, like especially when you get into the professional sphere, because I think like the culture of, I guess I would say like jazz musicians, right? There's this whole genre of like gigs you can take called like, most people would call it jazz casual, where it's like anyone who is at a certain level in playing jazz music, it's like everyone sort of knows the protocol. Like if you're joining a quartet, like if I were to join a quartet as a saxophonist, and I've never played with the drummer, bassist, or pianist before, it's generally considered that we would get together, no rehearsal really necessary. We would just call tunes, which are songs that are out of sort of like the Great American Songbook that we would all expect each other to know, and usually do. And we just play them, listen to each other, play off of each other. So what I find happens in gigs like that, because it's like this culture of like everyone knows what they're doing, everyone is already at the professional level, criticism can be really difficult. I was just on a gig, was this last night? It was last night? Yeah, it was last night. It was actually my first time doing singing in a quartet. It was like a Christmas caroling sort of thing. I was singing tenor in this quartet, and I hadn't sang with any of them before now. And I don't think anyone is going to be watching this podcast, so I'll just say it. I mean, anyone in that circle, right? The person that was giving me notes on that gig, like, it was like singing so out of tune. And like, it was a situation where like I was getting notes and I was like, well, okay, I'll accept them. This is my first time here. But at the very same time, it was just like, I have like 1,000 notes for you, but I'm not going to give any of them to you because I know that that's not my place here,
Right.
But it was like, oh, and so it's
know who I am?
Well, know who I am or not. It's like objectively, I was just listening and just like, ooh, wow, no, and so yeah, it's hard. It's hard, and the reason I held all of my criticism is because on some level, I thought it was a pretty safe bet that if I told her like, hey, check your intonation, then that would be a problem. It'd be like, oh, why is this person who's new to this gig telling me what to do? And it's, same thing happens at the Disneyland Band, for example. I mean, so that's a gig that's been going for like almost a decade now. And so a lot of the same people still do it. And so there's, we've reached some kind of equilibrium, but I would certainly say that there are select players that just would benefit from listening to somebody's notes. That's all I'm going to say, but it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen because we're all on this professional sphere. And it's like, now my one caveat to that is I would say that once you get like actually a rung higher than that, like we're talking like, okay, now you're in like studio sessions. Now you're playing for like film orchestras, or you're like in sessions for A-list artists and stuff like that. I haven't done that, but I think my suspicion is that that's the realm in which you better be able to take notes. you cannot have. I think, I don't know, but I would suspect that that's like the level at which it's like, okay, maybe put your ego away. You
Yeah.
know?
No, yeah, because it's funny. Like the more, one of the interesting things over the years that I've, like figured, just like discovered, is where, for example, there's been a lot of bands, like famous bands that have millions of fans, like where like their recordings, like other people are recording in their session on their album. So it's like
Yeah.
maybe three of the five band members are actually playing, but the other two they can't count. You know what I mean? They can't count time or whatever the case may be, or they're just not getting it right, and someone else has to come in, and it's just like that's just
Oh,
that was like a fascinating thing for me, where it's like there was a lot more hired guns that have happened. And then they talk about like even the Beatles, where I forgot the guy's name, but he did a lot of the drumming doing a lot of the Beatles stuff, you know what I mean? So
yeah.
it's like I mean, imagine the how those people felt, where it's just like, I'm the band member, like I have to do this. It's like, yeah, you should do it, but studio time's expensive, my guy. We gotta get this album made. Like that's where it's just like,
Yeah.
it's a hard truth. It's a really hard truth,
I don't think I was actually aware that there were so many groups that sort of had ringers because members of the original band like weren't cutting it. That's I
There's a
so
really good
you
Netflix. There's a really good Netflix doc. I think it's called Higher Gun. Really interesting. Really interesting. I highly recommend. But yeah, I had no idea too until like a couple years ago. I was just like, wow.
yeah. So like my question would become, what do they do when they perform live? Is it just the new guy playing, like, or
What's funny? I think some of it is like a back to the basics type of sensibility, right? So they talk about, I've always seen like these funny videos that there's some truth within it, where you have guys that they do well playing in a band where, say, the drummer has a certain way of rhythm patterns that the guitarist is familiar with because he's been playing with them for X amount of years. But then when he has to record and he needs to listen to a metronome, he has a problem with that, because when he learned to play, he never did that. He never counted as he did all of those things, even when he learned music or whatnot. So then from a structural standpoint, and for the guy to mix it and everything knows what's in time, he's like, hey, this guy is like playing like off, like he's that like, so I think that's where a lot of that happens, where it's like, oh, he doesn't know how to count bars, like yeah. So I think some of those back to basics things, I think when like you're, once you're faced with that, I think that's what a lot of musicians I've hit, at least it's the ones that I'm referring to. It's really interesting to me.
no, that makes sense. Yeah, you learn a song with your band, kind of like oral tradition method, right? And then it's like you've got to talk about, okay, well, let's punch in for get this second chorus, and it's like the what? Like we're just playing the song. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, really interesting
Wow.
stuff there.
Yeah.
But man, yeah, it's funny too, because I remember, obviously, you're a Berkeley grad, so I've had jam sessions and then just conversations too. With I'm curious to get your thoughts on this.
Sure.
As far as like for folks that go to Berkeley, or just a prestigious, music, institution, and I've talked to a few of them where they just talk about, I'm glad your experience was good, because of the people that I talked to, they had kind of the opposite, where it's just kind of like they felt like they had to be compared against everybody. They felt like everyone was like the op, everyone was the competition. And, that feeling, it was just like, I hate this, it's like, I want to learn music and work with people, but it's like the person that you're working with, it's like they have a way about you because they don't want you to overstep them in whatever regard. I've talked to a few people as far as that nature. And I guess too, my second notion that I'm curious to get your thoughts on too is where you also have folks where it's like they're learning some of the most sophisticated, advanced, like type of music that is such a background and forefront for like pop music or just sort of today, and just their skills are just such at a high level. And when after graduating, some of them that I've talked to, it's like, you're playing bars at 11 p.m. at night, or there's 20 people, and it's just like, what the fuck am I doing? It's more part of my language. Like, what am I doing? You know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on that? Have you encountered it? What are your kind of thoughts on those?
Oh man. Okay. So yeah, Berkeley was very competitive. And I would say it was very competitive, as there were just a few categories in which it was competitive. There's so much I could say about Berklee College of Music. Oh my God. First of all, yes, very competitive because the jazz scene, it's known historically as like a jazz school. And so it attracts a lot of people who are very serious about straight ahead jazz. And the thing about the culture of people that are really serious about straight ahead jazz, or at least on the East Coast, I feel like it's been different since I moved out to the West, is it's not just competitive, it's also elitist isn't the word I want to use, but there's a lot of there can be a lot of gatekeeping. Yeah, there can be a lot of like, oh well, if you're not playing it this way, then you're not doing it like the true way, or you're not, there's just sort of, there can be a lot of gatekeeping was a good word, but I'm trying to find a better one. My biggest gripe with both the jazz school and the classical school is that there are a lot of people who sort of assume that like our purpose out here is to simply replicate that of those that came before us. And that's never been the point of classical music or jazz music, in my opinion. Maybe more so classical than jazz, but certainly not jazz. And while the pedagogy is important, you want to know what you're doing, and you don't want to assume that you are better than you are before you really are, expressing yourself in what I would describe as a sophisticated way, right? That's what all this is for, learning your chord symbols, and learning how to thread between the changes. I guess that's the beginning of it. But yeah. One thing that really doesn't help about Berklee is that they actually rate their students. There are rankings that you audition for every semester. Yeah, and it's something that sort of feeds the idea that there is this objective measure of how good you are at playing music. I think there are objective measures, but not very many. And I certainly don't think like the Berklee rating system was like an accurate, it was like a different jury every time, you would audition, you'd play like a selected piece, and then they'd like ask you for some scales or something. And there's like 4 categories like musicality, improvisation, something like that. And then you get like an overall score. You're either like, it goes from 1 to 8, 8 being like, you're phenomenal, and 1 being like, welcome to school,
Wow.
And yeah. Pretty interesting.
That's very interesting. Yeah, because I remember there's a story about Pat Metheny. He was auditioning for Berklee, and after him auditioning, they said, "You want a job here?"
Oh wow!
Yeah, and he started teaching at Berklee. So I was like, "Holy crap!" But yeah, and I can see that being damning in itself, right? Because like people already have a way about feeling about GPAs in general, so having a grade on your musicality and something that you were initially passionate about growing up. Oh, you're 4. Sorry. It's like, wait, what?
Yeah. Students just like, I'm a 6 and you're a 4, bitch. Like, damn.
Yeah, like I mean, yeah, that's like Hunger Games stuff. It's just like, oh my goodness, like that is. I can see just like it's funny too, seeing how and I guess this is necessary maybe directly towards like music in Berklee, but as far as like hearing some of these folks that they're there for a couple semesters and they drop out, they do their own thing, they do the John Mayer thing, right? I even talked to what's his name? Oh my goodness, Tomo Fujita. I talked to him. He was on my podcast. I talked to him on my guitar podcast, and he taught him for a little bit while he was there. But then he did his own thing and became John Mayer, right? So those notions are interesting too, as far as like kind of a take what you can get and like, oh, I was missing this the whole time, and then you kind of go be yourself, and do your own thing or whatever. I find that to be an interesting kind of story in itself too.
Yeah.
So. It's funny. This is going to be more of a deep cut question, but I'm just curious to get your thoughts on it because I know you would be someone who would have like an opinion about this. So I apologize for anyone listening to this that's like, "What the fuck are you talking about, Joel?" But but I've always thought about like because you have like you have these. like Whiplash is like one of my favorite movies like of all time, just because as far as like the story in general, just like how just the that pressure and just like just kind of the sensibility of like being a musician that wants to be better, and then having just like the combatants as far as like wanting to be a better musician, you know, and thinking that you're better, knowing you're better, and kind of like that journey, right? But more of my question is kind of like the music that is performed. I'm trying to think of his name. Gershwin. So I was reading or seeing something online as far as for, oh God, what is his name? He's one of the great American composers, jazz composers. He was
Ellington?
yes, Duke Ellington. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I heard something where there's like that Gershwin and Ellington had there was like a beef between them. As far as like how a lot of like almost like Gershwin, and I don't know if he was intentionally doing this, or maybe it was the people around him where they were trying to kind of like hide Duke Ellington's music or not perform more of Duke Ellington's music, or just kind of like maybe not acknowledge it. But then like Ellington, but yeah, right, yeah. Like I heard something as far as like how there was a constant kind of like almost like a beef that wasn't directly acknowledged, but you felt that energy was there. I don't know if have you ever heard anything like that? Like that before?
I've never heard about that.
Really? Okay.
I've never heard about that. I am also not the best with like I feel like every single person that I play jazz music with knows more about that than I do. And there are people that I could call tonight who would probably have a definitive answer for me on that. You know, like they'd be like, "Oh yeah, there was a huge beef between them. He did this. You know." Some people are. That's part of the gatekeeping culture, right there.
Right.
Right. You don't know this, and it's like, no, sorry. You know, I like house music. So no, that's insane, and it's not insane. It's actually believable. Ellington was great. You know,
yeah, Gershwin was great. Ellington, right? Yeah, Gershwin was great too. You know, yeah. I just that thought. I was just like, wow. I was like, that makes. I mean, obviously, from a historical standpoint, like it makes sense. Just as like from like black jazz musicians in general, right? You know, it's like you got, you know, Thelonious Monk, where he was like beaten by cops like after like performing in front of like thousands of people or whatever it was, right? Like all these people being like, you know, just so as far as, and then like obviously you know, the them being toured in different, you know, areas and stuff, and you know, the whole Chitlin circuit stuff and all that. So it's like I could see a believability between those two composers, but yeah. So
it's tragic because, you know, I think there are a lot of positive stories of. I would say that there were a lot of artists at that time who were using sort of like the realm of music as, I think, the vehicle for integration. You know, Benny Goodman, the clarinetist, was one of the first white jazz musicians to say, like, screw y'all, I really like this dude named Charlie Christian. Charlie Christian was a guitarist.
Yeah.
We don't really recognize him as such, but he was pretty much like the real innovator of like electric guitar and jazz. And I mean, this was like before some of the other people I'm thinking of, and I'm forgetting names right now, but this is really interesting to me to hear, because I know on the opposite side of the street, it's like a lot of musicians at that time were, right, arts were sort of the realm of work in which people could reasonably start to integrate, you know, and they would raise eyebrows, but it was like, well, okay, that's his band, you know, fine. You know what I mean? There's a really great recording of Benny Goodman and Charlie Christian doing this tune, I believe, called Flying Home. It's like one of the last like remaining video recordings of one of these performances between these two musicians. It's really beautiful.
That's phenomenal.
Yeah. I didn't even know that about Monk, though. That sucks, man.
Yeah, his it's funny. I had his biography. I didn't get to read through all of it. But no, yeah, he's amazing. And just his story is pretty wild too. You know, just as far as that. And obviously too, I remember what's his name? I I forgot he's like one of my favorite teachers I've ever had, but he was talking about Monk as far as just like he's one of those musicians where you automatically know who that is because he has a way of playing that no one really else has, you know, and I just find that to be so amazing to have a signature, right? You don't sound like anybody else. Like I love Hendrix and Aerosmith. I was watching the podcast, Aerosmith, they were like it, but there's so many people that they adapt that, but then like they're missing like, well, what makes you like you know what I mean? So some people go overboard, I feel like sometimes with, you know, you like someone's music that you play so much like them, it's like you almost lose yourself as far as like just like what is your signature, and having a signature, you know, like Thelonious Monk, I'm just like, that is so amazing, you know.
That is amazing. To think that everyone is playing sort of like the same instrument, you know, they're all playing piano, but he just happens to be playing the piano, you know, so differently than the others. Yeah, it's incredible. Yeah.
You are right about the integration too, because I remember there was also a story where Myles Davis, when he was doing Kind of Blue, and then a lot of people around him were like, they didn't really like, they're like, yo, who's that white dude playing the piano? Like what's going on? It's like, guys, like, trust me, you know, it's Bill Evans, you know what I mean? It's like, no, like, he's dope. Like, let him do what he's gonna do, you know what I mean? And obviously, like, you know, Kind of Blue, right? You know, so I find that to be special too when it comes to speaking just to the integration point, you know. Definitely like Myles was on that as well, you know, so
sure.
Very interesting.
That is interesting. And it's, you know, it's always, I think it kind of mirrors, I mean, it certainly does not mirror what we're looking at now, but in one way, like in the sense that, you know, throughout the union, we've got areas where, you know, I could put on, you know, like an open ass, like, let's say, what's the new persecution? Let's say like a drag show, right? You know, I mean, not even that, like here in California, it's like, it's so safe, you know? But that's not the case for other parts of the country, right?
Sure. Absolutely.
And I would say it was probably somewhat similar just in that realm. There were like certain venues and certain areas where people were like, yeah, we're about to listen to this integrated band. And then one stop on the tour, you know, down in like Birmingham or something, you know, and it's like, oh, this is going to be hard. You know, people are not going to like this.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. I have a loaded question for you. So I'm going to do a slingshot around to get to the question. So okay. Forgive me. But obviously you being, you know, you someone who not only, you know, reads, write music, you've created music, you know, and you know, performed and you know, written for so many different venues and things. And how do you feel about music today as far as, you know, we're going from a point where music used to be the forefront, right? Like no one had TVs, you know, but you had radio, you had music. Music was the primary thing that we focused on and listened to. And now music is in the background. Music is something that just have something on in the room as everyone else is chattering. Music is this fucking, you know, a part of a streaming service where 80% of the fucking the streaming services, like people on it, they don't even earn any money anymore, right?
Yeah.
So it's becoming such an artificial thing, and they want to give like these Spotify numbers of the year. Like I stopped sharing mine because I'm like, none of this matters. Like how do you feel about music today as far as like its importance, its relevancy? Like how do you like, as like a, you know, incredible musician, composer, like how do you feel about it today?
That's hard. I still feel hopeful about it. I feel optimistic. I think people still love music. I think I don't want to negate any of like the very real instances of like the commodification of music, because that's definitely the truth. It's right. Way easier to access. The barrier to entry is way lower, and that in my opinion, that has benefits and detriments.
Sure.
I think in my opinion, like the biggest thing that's gone away, well, there may be three things. One, right, musical artists being compensated fairly, unless they're like at the very top, like A-list artists, right? B, the general complexity of musical ideas kind of watering down a little bit. production has a lot of hand in that. I
Yeah.
think production is the new musical complexity. So you can have a really simple musical idea, but if the production is like really masterful, then that's like, okay, yeah, that's artistry too. What's the third thing? Oh no, my train of thought. It would seem as if music is less special because it can be found anywhere.
Yeah.
I attended like a little bit of live theater the other day, and I couldn't get the thought out of my mind, like how magical was this shit like back when you couldn't go home and listen to music, or like you
Right.
couldn't, like you would go to the theater and right there in front of you would be the lights and the stage and the costumes and the singing and the orchestra behind it. It's just like, that must have been incredible,
Right.
before it was so accessible, just day to day, I think. And I think that's sort of an effect that we're seeing with music now. It's like, I think it is being valued less. I think musicians are being valued less. There was a culture, I think in like the 70s, 80s, where, at least with horn players, and I know this because I've talked with some of the cats that were around back then, and there was sort of this culture of like studio players that they were always getting work because trumpets and saxophones and trombones or whatever were like constantly part of the music. In the disco era, you had full orchestras behind Earth, Wind, and Fire, behind, these chart topping artists,
Absolutely. Right.
and you do now sometimes, just not nearly as much, I think. And so there were, from what I understand, there were just like a lot more jobs for traditional, instrumental musicians, and they paid quite well too, and you got a lot of them. I've heard stories of like, I don't know, top trumpet player in town who just did all the sessions, living in like a mansion and having like a helicopter and shit, because it's just like that's how much money he was able to make doing that, as and the best players now, if they're doing studio sessions for like film, they're still making good bread. It's just, I think that those jobs are much less
Right.
common. I feel optimistic about the future of music in general. Like I don't think, what is it? What I am confident of is that we will begin to find ways to reverse the effects. Like, I guess I can't say that with confidence, but I just think eventually artists will find out, like, okay, if Spotify keeps, let's say Spotify is a great example, keeps undercutting and paying their artists like half a cent for 100 streams or whatever, then artists then have to find new ways to make that revenue. The fans of their music won't go anywhere, which I think is that's the saving grace of it. Like if you have people that enjoy your music and therefore want to support you because they want you to continue doing what you do, then there are all sorts of, there's merchandising, there's selling your music physically, even if it's not like a CD or a vinyl or something that people have a player for. An idea I had was something like make like a little piece of art, maybe like a little sculpture or something that has, maybe it's like a memorable kind of thing that maybe it's got a QR or like a USB or like the music's on it, but it's still like a physical thing that they buy. I feel like that's about as far as I've gotten.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's hard. It
Yeah.
is really difficult these days for that, and I definitely don't have any answers. But I feel optimistic that people will find ways to make their living off of their art despite, and B, that consumers will eventually get tired of this highly commodified like music. I feel like I'm already starting to see like wedding DJs were a really popular thing, right? They still are, but one thing that's really catching on with a company that I work for is adding a live saxophone to the DJ. And sometimes we even hire like a live drummer as well. So now we've got 2 live musicians on top of the DJ. And it's not like having a band, but what it is, and it's really been growing in popularity, which I feel kind of says that people are like a little bit, they still like having musicians in front of them. So
Yeah. No,
yeah.
I think that's great because You know, I was talking to a gentleman about this before, and he was kind of in the music scene, you know, when he was younger. And he said it used to be where, like, the guitarists and the live musicians, they fucking hated the DJ. You know, they were just like, this is the guy that's stealing, like, our gigs, basically. It was just like, well, why would I pay, you know, 5 people when I can just pay one guy, you know, and he's got it all on his stuff, you know? So I remember back then it was like, yeah, there was definitely that, you know, separation there. But yeah, that incorporation I think is genius, you know, especially because obviously DJing isn't going anywhere, and there's an right, you know, and there's an importance to it, and obviously, you know, it's a connection to, you know, how hip hop got birthed, you know, and stuff like that. So there's a great historical connection there, right, musically, and incorporating a live component within that, I think it's great. I think it's really neat. You know, tell me a little bit as far as, you know, I know you said as far as, you know, you kind of do like a dancing-ish element as you're playing saxophone. When did that, you know, that idea for yourself kind of like, that you wanted to kind of start doing that?
Oh man, I feel like the real answer is a super long time ago. I remember being in high school and being really into this show called America's Best Dance Crew. And I was just I was in marching band at the time, which is, it has like a little bit of holdover into what I would say is like, let's say 7-person choreography, where the formations, you know, like move around and stuff. And so I was watching that stuff a lot, and I was so into it. I loved these dance groups. And I kind of left it alone, again, with just being in like a bad place, just in general, like as a young person. Part of that was just, well, none of that matters now, but it took me quite a while to be, I think, okay with the idea that, like, hey, it's not at all cringe or outside of the realm of what's expected of you. That was on my mind at the time. You know, that's like the opposite of artistry. Like, what's expected of me? That's not what an artist does.
I agree.
You know what I mean? So yeah, there was just a lot of like inner growing to do before I would begin acting on that passion that I did have somewhere in there for all that time. That was choreography, executing choreography, and enjoying the effect that you get from multiple people pulling off the same choreography at once, you know? And that's sort of, I'm in the middle of writing music for a band that I am launching called Tone Police. And that is,
cool.
That's my venture. Oh, thanks. That's my venture into this sort of dancing band. Ideally 3 horn players, you know, trumpet, trombone, sax. Simple, just 3 people, right? And we can all sort of like execute this choreography together. I think there's a lot of impact in that. And even if there isn't impact in it, that's the thing, is like, I think I'm just starting to realize that that's something that is going to be renewably enjoyable for me. And that's everything, I think, right? So, yeah.
That's very cool. Yeah, that's really neat, man. No, yeah, because I've always appreciated when there's some type of just like when someone can perform and they're not just focused on like getting the notes right, playing the song right, but then they're able to perform on top of that. Like for me, I'm very much, when I play live, I'm very much like, I'm an introvert, right? So when I'm performing, even if it's in front of like, you know, 30, 40, 60, 100 people or whatever, I'm always thinking like, I'm in my bedroom, I'm playing. Right? That is my comfort zone, and I just focus on that, right? And I don't know, some type of expression playing too, but that is kind of my focus. I've always been like, appreciated when you have someone like Matthew Bellamy from Muse. You know, he's known to be an incredible performer, just like, not even just him playing, but his movement. Like when he plays guitar, he's almost like dancing, if you will, or whatnot, but he is playing accurately at the same time. So it's not like a punk notion where, you know, punk is great too, but where it's like it's this kind of like expression. Like it's not even just expression, it's like expression, and then it's like performing and then accuracy at the same time. I find those things to be very, very fascinating, you know, to be able to do that as well, you know, because it's kind of like it's like the front man, you know, front man of like Rolling Stones, for example. You know, it's like you can stand up and sing with the mic, or you can really interact with the crowd, engage, and, you know, just like that that whole part of artistry, that part of like, that's all a skill in itself. So just, I've always found that a fascinating thing. So I think that's a really cool idea, and you know,
Thanks.
and I'm excited to hear more when that transpires. So, yeah.
I think partly too, that's part of it, is this idea that traditional instruments, you know, saxophone is sort of the outlier. Saxophone is like the people's wind instrument. You know, trumpet and trombone, like they're really common, but like people just love saxophone if they're gonna pick one wind instrument, right? And I've just started to. I think this is part of what it is this idea that, okay, well, if, you know, people find this kind of instrument playing boring, then like boring. And I resent that. But it's like, okay, if we add some visual elements to it, you know, maybe that draws people in long enough to actually see what's going on. And then, you know, because I think when people listen with their eyes. And I think when they see someone playing like a saxophone or a trombone, the visual aspect is not there as much, certainly not as much as it is for like guitar, you know, or even violin.
Yeah.
You know, saxophone, fingers, you know. So, and working at Disneyland definitely taught me this too, because the band that I was hired to is like so much about choreography. It's not just a band that plays. It's like a band that plays and also executes like choreography and what they call drill, like formations.
Oh yeah.
During. So it's a hard group, one, and two, like Disney knows it. You know, they figured it out that like, hey, if we get these people to like move around a little bit, then it actually engages people a lot more. And that band is actually the number one atmosphere entertainment group in the park.
Wow.
So yeah, so that signals to me that like maybe there is something there, and if I enjoy it, then like, you know. So anyway, yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, if you like what you're doing, that is definitely a check in the box there.
Yeah, it's a box check. Anyway.
I guess one of the last things, you know, anything you can promote to, you know, people that are, you know, fan of your music and looking forward to anything you do in the future, you know, feel free to plug anything coming out or what have you.
Sure. Yeah, I feel like I've finally figured myself out musically, so I have a few projects going on now. If you like ambient/meditation music, I'm making that at Rainbow Fish. That's one word. I do a sort of extremely queer DJ and saxophone kind of dance romp. I've been doing that under the name Max Gamble, but I might just start going out as Myles Davis. I'm ready to stop hiding.
There you go. Let's go. Very cool.
Yeah, and then lastly, Tone Police is the band that I'm putting together that will feature horns and choreography. And yeah, so this is sort of like my 3 projects.
Awesome. Well, Myles, man, thank you for being on the show, man. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it, Jarrell. Thank you.
Of course. All right, folks, well, there you have it. This is Artists Like Us. Have a great rest of your year, and we will definitely we'll be around here for 2025. I'll be around in 2025 getting more episodes, but until then, signing off. Take care.
All right.
Well, you know I like to stay low. I'm out to what's in my headphones. Chill and I lay back to the stoves. Set my mind on cruise control. Music revolves around my mind like it's an access. Sometimes